How does it feel to be an icon? Be called an icon? I'm not an icon, I'm a person. And to make an icon of me is to reduce me. But also, icons are holy. I'm unholy. I'm very honoured to be invited to give the inaugural Winifred Mercier lecture. I tend to think of myself as a bit of a lightweight next to Winifred, I have to say. And I'm going to say some things to you today that you may not necessarily agree with. This doesn't worry me. All I want you to do is to think about what I'm saying. Some of it will occur to you as obvious, and that's actually my special subject, is the obvious. The obvious that people have somehow failed to notice. It's really difficult to think of a teacher these days who hasn't been exposed to feminism and hasn't absorbed some part of the feminist agenda. They're working women for a start. They're working in an industry that has been controlled historically by men, and also an industry in which the female-dominated part of the profession is very much inferior to the male-dominated. Well, there's almost no part of teaching now that's male-dominated, but if you think that the primary school and preparatory school teachers are paid much less than teachers higher up the scale, this has got something to do with the fact that it's seen as a female domain. And I would hope that teachers are beginning to see that that's ridiculous, because elementary schooling is what everything else is based on. Get that right, get children used to learning and understanding that there's stuff to be found out there and it's fun doing it. Once you've done that, it's plain sailing, but that has to be done. When the female unit was written, all I could think of was that I was going to see it on the remainder tables in Great Russell Street as I went past on my way to the British Museum to study, and that I would have embarrassed myself and everybody else because the book would be a total flop. And in fact, it nearly was a total flop because it was very badly published in England. But then the Americans got hold of it and the rest is history. I haven't changed my mind about anything in the book. I would change the emphasis now. I mean, then I was a 30-year-old heterosexual, sexually active woman who was still negotiating the rapids of sexual encounters and all that sort of thing. So I was more caught up in things about appearance and the dynamic of male-female interaction and so forth than I would be now. I mean, now I wrote another book called The Whole Woman, which deals with other things that I would probably think now are more important, like women's sorrow, women's grief, and what it's like to be steadily rejected by the people you've spent your whole life loving and serving, which is the fate of most elderly women. You know, you go into these facilities where old ladies are left to gently rot, and you sometimes wonder if what they're shouting is "fuck!" because they're so angry because they gave it their best shot and they got dumped. Customers and clients, students come to university to buy something. What they're buying is knowledge. The commodification of knowledge. God, what a disgusting idea that is. It's horrible, isn't it? If it means anything good, it means that as a client or a customer, a student has a right to demand a certain level of service. And I would say that in many places where I have taught, students did not get that level of service. They were taught in a way that was palpably uninterested in them, because the people who taught them were busy working on their book or their whatever, and you went and knocked on their door and you were interrupting their train of thought. and you were not a part of their train of thought. You were an inconvenience. I taught at a university where, for example, the person who'd been hired to teach the 18th century literature wouldn't teach it because he was writing a book. And he said it was too difficult. Students couldn't do the 18th century. It required too much of them. So I said, okay, I'll teach it. Typical woman, I'll do it. And then, even more stupid, I said, I'm going to do 2 lectures a week instead of 1. That means 20 lectures instead of 10. And I want you to come to them. And I set out a whole map of the 18th century from the beginning to the end. And we had a great time doing it. And they were roaming off all over the place, reading Spenserian stanzas and Ossian, and I taught Mystics and Madmen, which was Clare and Blake and Christopher Smart. It's only 1 hour to teach 3 amazing lunatics, and the kids had a grand time with it and did very well in the exams. And there's a lot of that goes on. Well, if that means now, you know, that students can go and say, I'm not going to go to lectures if all I'm going to get is a lecture that was written 10 years ago, that he's just reading his old notes and doesn't make eye contact with anybody, doesn't understand where anybody's coming from. This is not good enough. If that's what it means, but I very much doubt that it does mean that. I hope that students are into some of the most radical thinking that's going on, most of which is probably anarchist, which is talking about alternatives to authoritarian government. But in fact, while all this goes on, the government actually becomes more and more and more and more authoritarian, and every year that passes increases the amount of control exercised by the government over individual people. And one of the things that used to distress me is that students were always begging for more in the way of surveillance. We want more cameras because the women are afraid of being attacked at night. We want more lights. We want more... I'd be going around with a pea shooter, getting rid of the lights so that we could have some darkness and some sanity. But it depends whether students feel deeply insecure, and I think they do. Usually what happens when jobs get harder to get is students get conservative and just want a job qualification. They certainly don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to develop revolutionary ideas. They just want to know that they won't starve to death. The sexual revolution has not begun. We are still in the prodromal stages. There's going to be a big struggle. And we don't even know quite what the struggle is going to be about, because we haven't finished or arrived at any consensus about what the problem actually is, of whether it's possible for men and women to treat each other decently. It doesn't look possible. You know, if you think that 2 women a week in this country are killed by their partner, you've got to think there's something terribly wrong. But of course, if you can say to somebody, get fucked, and mean it as an insult, then obviously your head's in a bad place where fucking is concerned. So how can we get the sadism out of it? How can we become potent rather than vicious? Do we know how to do this? Have we even begun to figure out why all we seem to be able to do to each other is hurt each other? I never wanted equality. I think it's a meaningless idea, nonsensical idea. I certainly don't want the life of an organisation man. I don't want the life of a corporate lawyer or a bonds trader or even a diplomat or a parliamentarian, because you're simply recycling the same injustice and misery. So what I look forward to is a complete reversal of priorities, so that the things we take for granted as being trifling, like housekeeping, become major. For example, we need to housekeep this planet. We need to really bring in principles of domestic economy, that we're not behaving in a way which is depleting the resources of the planet, reducing its biodiversity, which is our real inheritance. Everything else is nonsense, all the great houses and silliness. Even the works of art are nothing compared to biodiversity. But in order for that to become so important that people will accept a fall in their standard of living and live in a more frugal and austere way, we've really got to have a completely different mindset. Consumerism's got to be as no-no as drinking and driving.